school function though. It's like a travel team or something like that.
Right, right. All right. Good evening, board members and residents. I'd like to call to order the regular board meeting for Monday, January 25th, 2016. Will everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We unfortunately do not have a clerk, so there is a need to appoint an acting clerk. Mr. Tominello has indicated he'd be willing to do so. Is there a motion to appoint Mr. Tominello?
I'll make a motion to appoint Mr. Tominello as acting clerk for this evening.
Okay.
Support.
All right. We've got a motion by Mr. Battanti with support by Mr. Camperl. Is there any discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Now, maybe I'll ask Mr. Tominello to take the roll call this evening.
Sure, Mr. Supervisor. Mr. Battanti?
Here.
Mr. Brado?
Here.
Mr. Caprow?
Here.
Mr. Tominello, present. Mr. Verkest?
Here.
Mr. York is excused, and Mr. Witt is excused.
That's correct. Good. All right. Next on our agenda is the approval of the consent agenda, including the approval of the regular board meeting minutes of January 11, 2016, and the special board meeting minutes of January 8, 2016, as well as the approval of the bills in the amount of $1,078,799.66. Is there a motion?
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda and the bills in the amount of $1,078,799.66.
All right. Is there support?
Support.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. Brado, with motion by Mr. Battanti, with support by Mr. Brado to approve the consent agenda. Any discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, board. Next on our agenda is the approval of the regular agenda. I'm not aware of any amendments, and if there are none, I'd be looking for a motion to approve the regular agenda as presented.
So moved.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. Camperl. Is there support?
Support.
All right, support by Mr. Brado to approve the regular agenda as presented. Any discussion, board members? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Next is announcements. I have a few announcements. Due to the cool temperatures, we've experienced freezing in the canals. So as a reminder to our residents, we're reminding all residents to be aware of and to follow our ordinance regarding bubbling systems around a boat. The entire perimeter of any open water which is maintained by a bubbling system must be clearly delineated by rope, fencing, or buoys. If there's any ambiguity, questions, you can contact our ordinance department. The officer's number is 466-1423. There is an election scheduled for this March 8th. Residents will be asked to vote on the presidential primary, and the ballot will also include a non-homestead millage renewal for the L'Anse Creuse Public School District and a Harrison Township millage question for public safety. For all information on all township events, you can call the supervisor's office, 466-1445, or visit the township website, harrison-township.org. Information on our millage can be found on the website, and information regarding L'Anse Creuse's millage can also be found on their website. Are there any other announcements? Hearing none, we'll move on our agenda. We have an item B1 from Supervisor's Office. Board members, I was actually, my office was contacted by a retiree, Miss Barbara Casey, regarding her dental and optical insurance coverage. When Miss Casey retired, she opted not to take the health care, the medical insurance. She, in writing, gave a request that we would cancel her coverage for optical and dental and requested compensation for not receiving the coverage. I investigated what the cost was. The cost of the coverage is currently, our cost to deliver the coverage is currently $1,518.96 annually. And although the optical hasn't gone up very much, the dental has experienced some moderate annual increases. I contacted Ms. Casey and discussed several options. The proposal that I have before you, based on our discussion, would be to permanently waive the dental and optical and coverage for an annual payment of $1,000. This would save the township a little over $500 a year this year. As time went on, that savings would likely increase. Although there's different options, one would be to say, well, a 50-50 split or come up with some other policy. What I was primarily looking for was to try to pick some simple, level way to administer the benefit. So I'm certainly open for discussion, but I was looking to avoid a scenario where on an annual basis, someone has to sit down and calculate that, which could be done. If this happens to recur with other retirees, we could certainly look at that. But the proposal was, as time goes on, if Miss Casey is blessed with a long life, the benefit to the township would likely increase over $518.96 at our current rate. And I did draft a sample agreement. I'd asked Mr. Huth to take a look at it. I think it's pretty basic. We would say that if she opts out, it's a permanent opt-out. It would be prorated if either her or her husband were to pass. And we would just do a payment once a year. So upon the anniversary of this agreement, we would start the clock ticking, and after a 12-month period, if everybody's healthy and alive, you pay it off. Typically on these kinds of things, it would be prorated if either person were to pass, which is typical for the other benefits, and this agreement acknowledges that. So I don't know if there's any discussion, ideas, or a motion.
Is this something that we've ever done before with any of the employees?
Yep, well, it's a good question. Yes and no. So we'll say that there was a time when, at retirement, I would say that maybe it'd be better to say that there are current retirees that signed agreements when they retired to receive some payment in lieu of health insurance. So there was a practice sometime prior to, I'm sure anyone on this board, I would assume including Mr. York, where upon someone's retirement, they'd say, well, we'll agree to accept the cost of a single person coverage in a form of a cash payment in lieu of receiving health care. So the answer would be yes in that sense, but otherwise in the sense of saying that you agree, to opt out, there aren't that many retirees that have retired with a pension but no health care. The majority of retirees qualified for health care, and in this case, Ms. Casey may have been eligible for some smaller amount, but she chose to opt out. So she's receiving a cash payment for her health care. But I don't know of anyone who's opted out of dental and optical. Of course, having said that, there's a part of me that questions the logic of paying $1,519 in premiums and having the person say, I don't utilize the benefit. So I can understand that side too.
We're going to discuss it now.
Yeah.
So, I think that the idea has merit, right? I mean, if we can save money and accommodate someone, I think it has merit. But I also think that we need to be fair and consistent and try to avoid unintended consequences. So, while I realize this is about dental and vision, somebody could ask about some other benefit, I guess.
Sure.
And so, the point I'm getting at, Mr. Supervisor, is on the whole payment in lieu of, I think that it bears, you know, it's reasonable, but I really think we should have a policy in place to say, here's what we do. And then we can look at it and go, this is fair and reasonable, you know, and we've had unintended consequences, not exactly on this, but there have been situations where, you know, we've talked about it, where a letter was signed and somebody's getting payment, you know, it's sort of unintended, and we might not be able to think about it now. And the other thing I think about an arrangement like this is that it should be at our discretion, and we need some way to get out of it, because we don't know what's gonna happen down the road. So I would like to see us avoid something that's always, we're always gonna do this, it's never gonna change. That's my thought. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, I'm just saying, if it were up to me, I would like to see it tabled, put together a little policy in our manual, say this is what we're gonna do.
Sure.
My thought.
The other
Yep.
option that we could maybe
No,
look at is maybe a percentage. If in fact someone decides they wanna opt out of any benefit, and I'm just talking out loud.
Sure.
We'll say, you'll get 70%. That's flat.
Or- Yeah, or some number, whatever that might be.
70% of, yeah, or 80%, whatever. That's it.
Yeah,
And-
see, and what I'm concerned about this is what happens if, you know, the next board comes in and all of a sudden retired healthcare changes?
Right.
I mean, what happens if it changes? And that we no longer offer dental, or we get dental cheaper than $1,000, we're sort of locked in here.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
Yep. So make sure that, that everyone here understands our initial reaction upon reading the letter, independent of the person writing the letter. I mean, I want to make sure that's clear to everyone. This isn't a personal matter. I wouldn't know Miss Casey if I saw her.
Understood.
You know, so this has nothing to do with the employee. But the initial response was, well, wait a minute, you know, what do you mean you know, you want payment? No, I mean, that's not how it works. I mean, that was kind of a guttural reaction. But then as you think about it, you say, okay, well, is there an opportunity to save money? And if so, are we foolish not to
Sure.
investigate it? So that was the second thought.
You're absolutely right.
Right. Then the third thought was, the reality is that if there were 20 or 30 or 50 people that might have this, then we may be onto something, but the likelihood that anyone else may come forward with this, you know, is probably limited. There aren't that many people who fit into this bracket. Generally speaking, you either need benefits and accept them, or you don't. So I looked at, the reason why I have this proposal is I looked at basically trying to simplify the process. I have no problem with tabling this. I mean, this isn't certainly not time specific. If we do, a point of clarification, if we do make changes to health care, I patterned this after prior agreements, which isn't necessarily the right thing to do. But in the past, when retirees have agreed to opt out of health care, they've signed a document saying, I'm never gonna get it, and I'll only get this payment. So, you know, it's true that if some socialized form of medicine came along, you'd have to need to reconsider this, and you could get stuck. And while I understand and agree with the idea of a percent, you know, there's the notion of saying, okay, well, on an annual basis, do we calculate this? Again, if I knew that there was a likelihood of having, you know, a dozen or so possible candidates, then you'd say, okay, let's have a system in place. I've been a board member now for 7 years, and I've never come across this. So, at least in an explanation, I wrote it because I'm not even aware of this
Sure,
coming up
understand.
before, and I don't know that we're gonna be barraged by it, but I have no problem tabling it, forming a committee, investigating it further, but I would need some guidance. In other words, this was a relatively quick, concise way to knock a $1,500 expense down to a $1,000 expense, and in the future, probably save more. And it doesn't preclude us from making any other agreement with someone else in the future. So it's important to understand that once a person retires, this isn't a collective bargaining situation as much as it is a one-on-one agreement with that individual.
But I think that's what, and from my perspective, I'd almost like to avoid a one-on-one. I'd rather have something that sets out a guideline that's written in our favor. You know, the township has at its discretion the right to do this, and, you know, come up with some guideline. I don't think it would be that hard.
No.
And also a way out. I'd like to see a way out. Whereas if some unintended event occurs, we just had an instance where healthcare our costs were reduced.
Mhm.
You know, it's not impossible. So I just would like to see us think about it, come up with a little policy. I think it's a good idea, Mr. Supervisor. I like saving $500. I like to save $500 on everybody's
Sure.
healthcare.
Sure,
So I just think if we spend a little time at it, and I'm willing to help do that.
okay. So, a couple of things. One is, at least in response, I understand and respect the opportunity to get out, right? So you can say, okay, if there's a time when this isn't advantageous for either party, right? Because this is at least today, what you could generally call a win-win. This person is saying, hey,
Sure.
you're spending $1,500, I don't use it. So, but I would be happy to get 1,000, and I think, okay, well, I'd be happy to start saving $500 with an opportunity to save more in the future. So, if something were to change for this retiree, there could be a point in the future, for example, where presumably some prior employer or her husband's employer says, well, we're no longer offering retiree health care. So
right.
that person could say, well, now I don't like this arrangement anymore, so we lose. So the opt-out thing can work both ways,
Well-
right? So you can go into an arrangement, say, hey, this is good, and you could find yourself in a situation where you say, well, I want to continue it, and the opt-out, it doesn't work. The second thing is, the reason why I'm hesitant with a policy, or at least something that we need to consider, is we have, I guess we have the opportunity to make a decision on what's best for the township on an individual case-by-case basis. So, for example, a retiree could say, well, in my case, my husband has the opportunity to, or my spouse has the opportunity to get one-person coverage through their retiree, but there's a $100 deductible, and there's this and that. So I'd make an arrangement if you promise to pay this. And you'd say, okay, well, in that case, I wouldn't necessarily want to be bound by a policy. I want to be able to have the freedom to consider the offer and the arrangement with that retiree on a one-on-one basis and enter into an agreement.
Well, maybe the policy can even be general enough to allow us to do that. I'm just saying it's something that we rely upon to say, the question Mr. Tominello asked was, do we do this? And if we had a policy that says that we have certain parameters, and under those parameters, we can consider doing that.
Right.
That's, and maybe it's too general in nature, I don't know, but Mr.
Well,
Booth,
At least if I can respond, that's my fear. A policy, no matter what that policy is, if it's general, it would be sort of like saying we have a policy by which we could, execute a contract with a vendor. Well, I don't know. If another vendor made an offer that was more attractive, do I want the policy to decide that by,
I hear
that?
you.
But I'm sorry. Go ahead,
no, I get you.
Mr. Huth. I sound like you.
No, well, I mean, you could do as you presented, have a policy as a guideline when these things come up in the future, just, I guess that way you can be satisfied everyone's getting the same treatment then, as opposed to something favorable, but, I agree, seems like a win-win anyway.
Mhm.
Maybe one way to, solve the issue is that either side could have an ability to terminate it on 30 days' notice, otherwise it continues to renew.
Right.
Well, and I guess that sort of goes to my question. So again, what happens in 4 years of, retiree healthcare changes? And, we need to be able to say, well, you're not gonna get any more anyway, so I don't wanna pay you anymore.
Yeah.
Great. And again, looking at it from the other perspective, there's likely a time in the future if nothing unexpected happens, or if things just continue to go as they have been, there's likely to be a point when this $1,518 grows to $2,600,
Sure.
right?
It will.
Right, so at least again, playing devil's advocate on the part of the township, my thought was, look, this is a good deal today. If it's a 50-50 thing, then you've got an agreement going forward and there's no reason to do it. But if the agreement is $1,000 level, and pretty soon the cost is $3,000, and I say, I want my 30-day opt-out, you guys can pay me $3,000, or pay me $2,000 and then I'll sign back up for the plan. I looked at it as saying, if you're gonna go for a level benefit, which is the way many of the other retiree health cares are structured, you sign up for it and it's good. Otherwise, pretty soon you say, wow, a one-person coverage is now $8,000 and I'm only getting $4,500. I wanna get out, start paying me the $8,000 and start
Well-
buying me an $8,000 policy. And you say, whoa, that's a huge cost increase, well, then maybe I'll take this much as a payment.
So
I was
maybe-
trying to avoid that bargaining in the future.
Right, so maybe those are the things we can consider as we draft a little policy, that's all. You know, I mean, those are great points.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah, and
That's-
let me make sure. I'm not giving the thoughts that I am because I'm opposed to a policy. What I'm saying is when I tried to, in my mind, draft that policy, I tried to think of what could I say in the form of a set of rules that would not bind me from making an agreement moving forward. So if the next person said, well, I'd only do this if it was a 50-50 split for eternity, well, maybe that's what makes sense at the time and I'd want to agree to it. It doesn't mean that this person has some rights. You agreed to a level thing. So no matter how you draft that policy, it's got to be so darn loose that we don't know what the future holds. And, you know, I think if you have an opt-out provision, you can't have a level benefit provision. Because I think there'll become a time when that level benefit has stayed where it is
Well-
and the actual cost of the policy grows. And now as a means of leverage against you, I say, I want to opt out, give me the policy back.
So let me ask you a question, Mr. Supervisor. Why don't we just say that the township has the right to opt out if in fact there's any changes to retiree health care?
It doesn't have to, you
It
know,
doesn't have to be
does-
both sided.
it
It
doesn't.
needs to be our side.
it doesn't have to be.
I think,
That way, you know, if things change, we can say we're not gonna pay you anymore because nobody's getting it anyway, or it's been reduced, or whatever.
And it may seem like we're
And I'm okay-
talking a lot
I'm
about
okay with
this.
I think
Right.
this is a great thing. I
Right,
mean,
but that could be as simple then as a clause that says, added to this, that says if the cost to provide the coverage is ever less than $1,000, the township is bound to pay no more than whatever the cost of the
I
coverage is.
think you leave that up to the attorney to figure out what kind of language gets put in there.
Sure, sure. But, so, the short thing, I don't mind tabling this, talking about it at some point in the future. So maybe, if it's agreeable, we form a little subcommittee or something, I don't know what you have in mind, or how do we draft this?
So is it the board's pleasure to try to get a policy first, or to ask the attorney to make the changes to the contract and try to move forward with this and then build the contract, or
Right.
the policy?
Well,
I mean,
that's,
there's two different ways we can do it.
yep, Mike, that's a good point.
I mean, we have a motion, if we table it.
Well, we don't have any motion at
Well,
this
no,
point.
but we have the agenda item, so
Right,
does it make sense to make the changes, come back to the board so we don't lose sight of it? In the meantime, there can be a motion to put a committee together to put together a policy, I guess.
My personal preference, if we're asking the board, my personal preference would be to just draft a policy and consider this once that policy's drafted.
and I'm
That would
okay
be
with
my
that,
personal
and what I'm trying to say is I don't wanna be saddled with drafting a policy that I don't own or understand what the need for is. And I don't mean that to suggest that I don't understand what some of the objections are. What I'm saying is I feel like for as many reasons as there is to have a policy, I feel like there's reasons not to have a policy.
Okay.
So I don't wanna, in other words, I hope the motion isn't tell Ken to go make a policy, cause I don't own that policy. I'm struggling with it. I understand the reasoning between saying, well, we don't wanna find ourselves either legally bound or financially bound to something that's gonna hurt the township in the future. That certainly isn't the goal. But I don't know that we need a policy to get there. That's what I'm
Okay.
saying. So if we wanna draft a policy, it's okay, but I need somebody who's interested in drafting a policy to offer their input to that.
I'd be
I'm
more
willing to work with that.
I'd be
right?
more than happy to serve as a chairperson of that.
Yeah.
I'd be
And-
more than happy to do that.
And I'm not trying, you understand my point.
I
So
do.
that's, you know, so, I mean, maybe the two of us work together to come up with something. I'm okay with that.
I'm good with that.
And we bring it back before the board.
I think the one advantage of in my sentiment, a loose policy is that you get away from the prejudice of somebody, oh, I like this guy, so I give him a little more, and I didn't like this person, so I give him a little less. At least a loosely written policy says, okay, this amount, and that's where we're going.
Yep, that's fair.
and
Okay.
my point with the 70% was that if anybody approaches us, they automatically know they're gonna get less than what that face value is.
Yeah.
So that takes that right away.
Right, and I'll be honest with you, if I was putting it in writing, I wouldn't put 70%. I chose a 70%, what really isn't necessarily 70%, but I chose that thinking, simplify it for accounting so that, you know, for the
No
next
calculation.
20 years, someone isn't saying, well, is that this policy or is it that policy? Do we calculate it at this rate? her husband's expired, now does she get this? I was just trying to simplify that. And perhaps that policy can say that the board would consider either a level benefit or a percentage benefit, and they would have certain mechanisms in place that would allow one side, both sides, neither side to opt out, so
Right.
forth. So, I'm good with that. So, I don't know that we need a motion,
No, it doesn't.
to really go back and reconsider a future agenda item, so. And for the sake of those folks who may be present that wish to weigh in, it's fortunate because the next item on the agenda is public comments, so we'll open up the floor for public comments.
Well, I thought you needed a motion, but what the heck. I'm looking at the letter from Mrs. Casey, and it says she retired in 2005. My retirement package included annual compensation for not being covered by health insurance. What was that annual compensation, and how did that relate to the cost of health insurance? Something tells me that it probably wasn't as much, or was probably something close to the $1,000 you're proposing to give her. To my way of thinking, I like the idea about a percentage, but the percentage ought to be based on what you gave here. You ended up, say it was $5,000 at the time, and you gave her $1,000, and that's all she gets as a percentage of the $1,500 now. That's if you decide to do a policy. I don't like the idea of handing out money after the fact to anybody. It smacks of favoritism. It smacks of somebody may not know that the thing is available. Some of the retirees are rather unsophisticated and don't realize what they're entitled to. Once you walk away from this place, that's it. I mean, you just as easily could come back and say, we're not going to give you any benefits. And instead, you're being good people and you're giving them the benefits and so on. And then they come back and say, but I want money now too. I'm disgusted. She's been gone for 10 years. None of you even know what she did. I do. She was the ordinance enforcement officer.
I realize that.
She retired because she didn't want to face the new board. Very simply put. So, if you're going to draft a policy, be aware of the fact that you're not required to draft the policy. You're not required to give anything to retirees. And it's time to watch. You guys got to worry about what's going on in Harrison Township now. You are already using fund balance for the general fund. You're already using fund balance for the fire department. Jesus, if one of the fire department comes back and this guy gets a $70,000 pension, and oh wow, I want an extra $5,000 because I'm not going to take my health care because I'm the fire chief out in Richmond. What a farce. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
William Bardell, 19-year resident. The thing I want to say about the dental and vision is this $1,500 number. Usually, when you have retirees or working members, they're in a pool. What the healthcare organizations and the dental organizations do, they figure out an average cost per. Well, you got an average cost per person. Usually those trends will go up or down. Well, let's say you start to have retirees that floss and maybe take better care of their teeth. So basically your batting average, your average goes down, your average cost goes down. So the $1,500 number, which in essence is basically 66% probably, somewhere around there. Or 60%, but those numbers fluctuate every year because the health insurance, they pool. They'll pool a bunch of people that are healthy together. They'll pool a bunch of people that are unhealthy together. They'll, just like dental, they'll package that up. And as you negotiate every year with your providers, this person that doesn't use the dental and vision are working to your advantage, our advantage to our township. So when we go to buy the insurance, we say, well, hey, we got this retired member that's not using it. That's feather in our cap. That's part of our bargaining chip. So if you've got 50 members and only 30 of them are using the benefit, well, that's part of our bargaining committee. So I don't know, you know, my simple answer would be 50%. You know, make it a favor to, you know, put it toward our township. That's what I would say. But I would also say that when you go into negotiations with the healthcare companies and dental companies, that when you buy it, they're going to have all the health information, and they're going to be the cost of each person on a spreadsheet and average that out. So that fluctuates. So I don't know what to tell you on that. I would say the simple thing would be 50%, or don't give them anything, and use that person in the pool to benefit our township so we can get our costs cheaper. That person being in that pool, not using the benefit, should bring our costs down for everyone in the pool. The other thing I want to talk about is you might have heard about another fire in a neighboring community, and basic MO was no smoke detector. So again, smoke detectors, as the battery goes dead, you'll hear a chirp, you know, maybe once every 6 months. Then the chirp will be every 2 weeks, and then it'll be every hour. And instead of pulling the battery out, you just replace the battery. And the other thing is, Super Bowl is coming up. Everyone like stay safe and call a taxi and pace yourself. And the other item I want to talk about, we got a little bit of late Christmas present from our retention basin at 8.5 Mile Relief Train. We got 8.2 million gallons of sewage shipped into Lake St. Clair. We had a late Christmas present at our Chapton retention basin, and they dumped from 4:25 a.m. to 4 p.m., and we only got 1.25 inches of rain. So we got 8.2 billion gallons dumped into our beautiful lake where we enjoy water skiing, ice fishing, and so forth. We also got a Christmas present from the Martin Retention Basin. They dumped from 2:50 a.m. to 9:45 p.m. They dumped 41.8 million gallons of sewage into our wonderful Lake St. Clair. And we got 1.37 inches of rain. I don't think there's anything romantic about dumping sewage into our lake. I think we can make our lake better, and we are going to be networking with people from the Lake Erie watershed, and we're going to be getting to the bottom of some of these algae blooms that they're having in Lake Erie. Now you hear, well, our lake flushes out every 4 days, blah, 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 blah. You know, when you have 40 to 60 beach closings in a year, I don't think there's anything wonderful about that. And I don't think municipalities, I don't think that our government officials need to give permits to dump into our wonderful lake. And I'd like to remind everybody to go to savelakestclair.org and look under the facts. And also you can check out Save Lake St. Clair Facebook. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment. try to answer a couple of questions. It's true that Ms. Casey indicated her retirement occurred in 2005. Our records indicate that in fact the retirement occurred on June 30th of 2004. She retired under a letter of agreement, and although I don't know what her motive was, whether it had to do with the Board of Trustees, nobody on this board served during that time, and frankly, it wasn't a part of the decision-making process. But she did retire under a letter of agreement, and I'm going completely on memory, but I believe that her payment for not receiving health care was right around $4,500 a year, which leads to the next comment that we're handing out money after the fact. I personally take exception with that. What I'm proposing, or what I did propose with this agenda item, was to reduce the cost. So if we're paying $1,500 for a benefit, and someone receiving that benefit says, hey, I don't really need it, but I'd be willing to take something less than $1,500, then the goal would be, say for example, if it was 50-50, as some people have suggested, the goal would be that instead of spending $1,500, we only spend $750. True, we're handing out money, but we're handing $750 to a retiree instead of $1,500 to insurance companies. So the ultimate goal is to save money. And it's certainly at the pleasure of the board. As far as dental insurance in the future, we are not experience rated in our dental insurance. Generally speaking, I don't know that we've seen our rates go down as it pertains to dental insurance. The only thing we've done to reduce costs for dental coverage were to go to a network of dental providers. So we used to have an open network, now we went to the Dentamax network. It happened to have very little impact on our employees, but it did save us a modest sum of money. But generally speaking, not as quickly as medical insurance, but dental insurance has gone up gradually as time has gone on. And the simple explanation is, when you think of what your experience was in getting dental treatment or coverage 20 years ago, it's generally the same. There's some minor improvements, but braces are, more expensive than they were, but generally speaking, they do most of those things the same. Getting a filling, so on and so forth. When you think of your experience 20, 30 years ago relative to the kind of medications, prescriptions, and the various kinds of treatments and tests, we've seen a lot more significant changes and advancements in medical coverage, and as a result, those costs have gone up exponentially greater than dental. So, otherwise, that's all I had. I don't know if there's any other board comment. Hearing none, I'd be looking for a motion to adjourn.
So,
Is there support?
Support.
All right, we got a motion with support to adjourn at about 7:38. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries, meeting adjourned. Thank you, board.